Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to iTREND on ITV. I'm your host, Zaheerah Bham Ismail. Very often on our show, we profile dynamic people who are making waves, who are setting standards in our community, or who are showing us the way. This is not necessarily people who are always young, but more often than not, people who are elder than us. And this one guest that I have today is showing us that no matter what age you're at, your dreams can always turn into realities. Mr. Yusuf Garda, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
It's such a pleasure to have you on our show today. Uncle Yusuf, you wrote a book called Literature, Life and Cricket. And you wrote that just about a year ago, at the age of?
78.
78, Alhamdulillah. I have to ask you, at 78 years old, how do you decide to get up and say, I'm going to write a book?
My articles were written over a period of 50 years.
Alhamdulillah.
What I refer to as idle jottings in hours of idleness. Never meant for printing, never meant for publication, and never meant for money. And my first article was on Don Bradman, which appeared in the school magazine in 1956. So having written all this and reduced them into a computer with different fonts, different sizes, it was such a mixed bag, you could safely refer to it as mixed masala. And I realized by the age of 75, in the year 2014, on my birthday, 25th of August, that for me to publish now was impossible, that I'd missed the boat. Dickens was published at 22. Shakespeare was already a big name by 25. And most of the greats of literature make their impact between 20 and 30 and even later. But nevertheless, I had read in history that Bertrand Russell, at the age of 80, after that wrote 15 books. I also realized that Karim, at the age of 77, wrote a book called Kuli, Come Out and Fight. So Mac was a significant inspiration for me, that if he can do it at 75, 77, perhaps there is hope for me, because there's still some sanity left within us. And on my birthday, Zaheerah had invited a surprise guest called Andre Odendaal. And he had written 5 history books and 5 books on cricket. And when he gave his little talk, I think this was at Tasneem's house, in his speech he said, I promise you, I have no physical gift to give at the moment. But my gift to Yusuf is that give me 1,000 days, give me 3 years. And on his birthday, 25th August, 2017, we will come out with the book. So that seemed wishful thinking, reaching for the moon. Nevertheless, after a week or two, he suggested to me that I must send him one short story. So I took a short story of Shoti Waja, the manager of Taj, and sent it to him. A week later he told me, can you send me one article on cricket? So I sent an article on Sir Donald George Bradman. The third week he said, can you send me anything pertaining to life itself? So I said, all right, I'm sending you an article on Robben Island, my visit to him, when Andre became graduate from Cambridge, was also director of Robben Island, CEO of Western Province Union, and today he's a freelancer and does heritage books. So I sent him one on Robben Island. One thing led to the other. Every 2 weeks I was submitting an article, and initially he was attempting to put it together, but he also has had commitments. So he was writing his own book called Cricket and Conquest. And so occasionally there was no response for a week. And of course, when he put about 10 stories together, and 10 articles on literature in the computer, from my articles into his computer, all hell broke loose. Because on his computer, sort of spiderweb of jumbled words began to emerge. And he said, Yusuf, I don't understand what's happening. So there were two things that happened. He, as a writer, wanted to use Times Roman 12, and I had 10 different types of fonts. Secondly, because I used to read speeches at Wanderers and at gatherings honoring our past cricketers, I used to begin every sentence on the left-hand side, so that when I was reading, I could pick up the beginning of a sentence on the left-hand side. Now, every time I began a sentence on the left-hand side, on his computer, it formulated a new paragraph. So we ended up with endless problems, but he knew how to resolve it. He could get a typist, he himself did a fair amount. And that is how the nucleus of the book was born. And he said it will take him 6 months to put it together, things that are desultory and disjointed, but to bring some sanity and some coherence and some thematic expression in it. And after the 6 months, he sent me an outline in which he said, I see 3 distinct books, and we've got to blend it and merge it. I see your commitment to English literature and the short stories you have written about fitas, about real life characters rooted in reality, but you've used your imagination to give it a twist to the ending. You've got your life experiences like Johannesburg in high school, Bree Street, Ramadan, visit to Mecca, and finally he said, you've written about 2 facets of cricket, international cricket and our own very local cricket. And I was concentrating more on fitas cricket, like Jimmy Bulbulia and Sam Bulbulia, my brother, and Rashid Garda, and I'm thinking of Tiffy Barnes and Musa Mangera. So he tried to bring some amount of coherence, and he sent me a first draft, the beginning of 5 drafts.
Fantastic, alhamdulillah. But starting off with, you have an exceptional love and passion for literature. From as long as I know you, you are the most eloquent man. Your knowledge of literature is so extensive. So when you say that the grades of writing reach their peaks between 20 and 30, Uncle Yusuf, that's only because they hadn't met you yet. So alhamdulillah, I think you are still at your peak, and you're showing us that the levels of reaching our peaks is still as long as we need it to be. I want to first discuss literature, because that's the start of your book. Have you always had a phenomenal love for literature? Because even when you are quoting, you quote the greats of literature, it comes so easily to you. Many of us would need to go home to get a textbook to read up about it before we start quoting it. And as my viewers can see, you are one of the most eloquent men. It just comes across very naturally to you.
I think our school magazine was important. We had some interesting articles and stories. So that began to be embedded in us. There was no library, and that was criminal. There were very few books at home, except for 1 or 2 cricket books. But I think the cinema played a very significant part in educating us. So if you like Solly's Corner, it's a pity they should have had a library here in those days. Solly's Corner, or Ecclewires, is an institution on itself. It is equidistant from Kentucky, from Avalon, from Lyric, from Majestic Flats, and from Majestic Cinema, and from the high school.
Yes.
So when we came to see a cinema show, and I remember in particular the one that stimulated my interest in literature, 1954, I saw a film, and our friend Dr. Essop Jassat must have seen it. It was called A Tale of Two Cities. And on the screen, in black and white, there was an inscription, the very first sentence, the first paragraph of Dickens's book. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the season of hope, it was the season of despair. It was the spring of light, it was the winter of darkness. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going directly to heaven. We were all going directly the other way. Now I felt this was beautiful writing. And the last sentence of the book, a character by the name of Sidney Carton gives up his life in the Bastille by exchanging his place with that of a prisoner who was the husband of his girlfriend. And he gives his life away, and when he's marched to the guillotine, these were the words that he uttered. He said, and he was a lawyer, but he was a drunken, profligate, wanton libertine. And he said, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known." Next day, in Friededorp, I entered a shop and I saw Tale of Two Cities, brand new, like an orphan waiting to be picked up, and I bought it. And I spent a week reading it, and that was the beginning, and I still have that book with me. So one day we must have it here.
Definitely.
Tale of Two Cities. And so I was into that, and it took me a week or 10 days to read it. And so I missed out in all the school books, children's books, like Enid Blyton and Roald Dahl and
You were
Hardy
way
Boys.
ahead.
So I started with the classics, and then I took David Copperfield. And my friend was Abu Bakr Dengo, who's today a lecturer in physics in England, and he lent me the book, David Copperfield. And as I read it, I had that memory at that stage without repeating it. It was almost photographic, but I never became a hafiz. And the first lines in David Copperfield was so amusing to me when it said, "Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station shall be held by anybody else, the following pages must show. To begin with, I was born at 12 o'clock at night, when the clock began to strike and I began to cry simultaneously. In consideration of the time and hour of my birth, it was rumored by some wise woman in the neighborhood that I was destined to be unlucky, and also I was destined to see ghosts." So within a span of 10 days, I'd come across the glories of English literature, and I never had to look back.
Alhamdulillah. I think it's absolutely remarkable. You only have to be in Mr. Yusuf Garda's company to understand the love of literature, and to also understand how much we're depriving of ourselves to not be able to fit ourselves into that world and to absorb as much as he has over the years. Stay tuned. When we come back after the ad break, we continue with his story. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back after that ad break. We are chatting to the prolific writer, Mr. Yusuf Garda, better known as Chab Garda, who has written a book, Literature, Life and Cricket, at the wonderful age of 78. Uncle Yusuf, just before the ad break, we went through the literature, your love for literature, what inspired you, how you've walked this journey. The second part of your title is about life. And I know you've mentioned a number of stories in here, stories that bring up a lot of history in the area around us as well. But coming from a home, I want to talk a little bit about your life. You are surrounded by women, alhamdulillah. You've got 3 daughters, you've got granddaughters. How have you managed to maintain the space to still have your say with all these women in your life?
One of the lessons I learned, having 7 granddaughters and 3 daughters and 1 wife, was that one should remain silent. So almost, I was married 1965, 11th of July. For almost 50 years, I've been very much introverted and silent. And this was a necessary part of my growth in a family where there's 11 women and we meet every Friday night. And even with your hearing aid, everything is quite inaudible. So being silent makes you insular, but makes you a good reader. And also, what you can't say in your own house,
You're right.
you let off steam when you're out of your own house.
I love it.
So
the answer to anybody who wants to write out there is make sure you're surrounded by a family of women, which gives you time to focus on writing. Uncle Yusuf, your daughters have been, and your entire family has been very supportive of this journey, and I know has been exceptionally proud in walking this journey with you. This by no means has been isolated because we've seen it as a family collection, a family initiative. Has that been something that's been very important for you, that your entire family has been part of this process?
well, initially you must realize you don't have to write a novel with a fountain pen or with a ball pen. Today computers are good enough. And some years ago, my son-in-law, Zaheerah's husband, Shiraz Wali, showed me how to open up an article on a computer, and he showed me also how to save. So the most significant aspect of writing an article in a computer was how to save. When I wrote my first cricketing article on Brian Lara, I forgot to save it. And I realized, or I thought, that it had been wiped out. And I never wrote about Brian Lara again. I got disillusioned. After that, I wrote several other articles, but after the first few sentences, after each paragraph, I've learned how to save it. But also, it became more and more cumbersome to send emails to Cape Town because it was 1,000 days of not having proofreaders next to you, but all of them, 3 in Johannesburg and 5 in Cape Town. So I then ceded the task to Zaheerah that you begin to send these articles and give each one a number. And that made it easier, and in a sense I passed the buck on to her. So any blame attached to her.
We know where the fault lies.
Right.
But luckily this is faultless, so she's done a splendid job.
Yes, so that was important. Putting the photos together, involving the family together, sounding of the stories of Tasneem from time to time, because she has a flair for writing. Then you take Munira. Her most important task was to look after my business during the 1,000 days. And the granddaughters knew something was in the offing, and they were awaiting the book like the arrival of a newborn baby.
Alhamdulillah.
And only on the 25th August, when it did arrive, 1,000 books in Norwood, and we all opened it together, then it dawned on us that I'd written a book. Until then. So yesterday I had been not a writer, and suddenly I emerged as a writer. And Freud made a significant statement once in his book, when he said, if you've done a thing once, you can always do it a second time. And we have Dr. Yusuf Jassat here. If he can perform an injection once, the second time becomes easier. So it is like the routine of medicine. Writing became a little more routine to me, and I began my second book. But one has to imagine a lot of things, and you can sound off some people, but you can't sound out all people. So that was the background to it.
So there's no doubt that we're looking forward to a second book and many more books that will emerge from your library under your name.
Thank you, and hopefully so.
Inshallah. Uncle Yusuf, the third title of your book, the third part of the title of your book is about cricket. And I know that is something that you are exceptionally passionate about. You are an avid cricketer yourself, but it's something that you have followed over the years. Why was that? I know that that had to be a part of your first book, without a doubt. Where did the love of cricket come, and how do you marry a love of cricket and a love of literature in the same place?
The family was a cricketing family. the whole suburb played cricket. That was Fitas and Fordsburg. My brother Mohammed was a cricketer. Rashid Garda was a cricketer. Morris Garda went to Lawrence College and played for Nottingham. So being in a family, you had to end up as a cricketer or as an umpire or as a scorekeeper. But even if you were a non-cricketer, you had to show some enthusiasm and passion for cricket. So you couldn't avoid cricket. And also, in October 1956, the Kenya Asians came to South Africa. It was the first time in the history that a black team was coming to play a black team here. I was in matric, and I didn't make the first two teams, A and B in the trials, or possibles versus probables. It was a Saturday-Sunday match, and they told me, come, bring your equipment with you. You're not playing, but you can umpire the third match of the school. Well, the trial began, and the first hour or two, the score was 35-5. When onto our ground, and the grounds used to overlap in those days, three people came running in. One was Teng Bulbulia, two, my brother Sam Garda, and third was Ashraf Patel. Why it needed three people, I don't know. But they said, listen, the score is 35-5. Two people, I think Aishan Razdin and Kimi, they have not pitched up. They didn't have the transport. We'll give you a grace period of 10 or 15 minutes, during which you'll have to pad up and wear your clothing and go into the middle. And when I walked midway, my brother met me halfway. And the man who had been doing damages was an African bowler, a phenomenon called George Langa. And my brother told me, watch carefully, watch the ball onto your bat. We were all taught by Jimmy Bulbulia, you don't bat, cross-bat it, a straight bat along the straight path. So I faced him. My father was in that crowd, and my father had already, like Mr. Makoba, taken a bet with Mr. Kasim Kuvadia of Canada, that my son will get a century. You'll have to give all the equipment, including a bat. And by that evening, I had scored 126 not out.
Alhamdulillah.
So automatically, I had been thrust now into the Transvaal team. Monday morning when I reached the school, the news had reached Mr. Smith. So I picked up one bat, the Keith Miller bat, and Mr. Neiman then gave me a Don Bradman bat, and it was announced front of the school. And Monday morning, in the Golden City Post, my name appeared in the sports page, and it said, schoolboy steals limelight in Kenya trials. Now, that was the first time I saw my name in print. That was also the last time. I must say, with so much ovation and adulation, you must get a bit swollen-headed. I couldn't find a cap to fit my head even. And in the trial, in that match, a lot of scholars, we had a crowd of 8,000. Scholars came, and I scored 49 not out, and later captained the Transvaal team. So that was the stimulus which got me into big cricket, which is dangerous, you know. You can't start at the mountaintop, because now you can only fall down. So progressively I came down. But at the age of 25, I played my last cricket match, and I never played cricket again.
But the love of it has always remained. I think what's absolutely remarkable is when you listen to a man like Mr. Yusuf Garda talk, you realize how important it is and how easily he makes it sound to have the balance in life of life, literature, and cricket. The book is available. The sites will be up on our social media pages. Get your hands on it just to get a little bit of insight into how this remarkable man works. Uncle Yusuf Garda, thank you so much for joining us on air. I think we need another show just to hear more about you, but we're very grateful to have snippets into your life. Shukran so much.
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned. When we come back after the ad break, we have another prolific personality to chat to. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back after that ad break. I always say one of my favorite sets of people to hang out with are the people that are older than us, the elderly in our community, because the wisdom we take from them is priceless. My next guest, after following the prolific Mr. Yusuf Garda, is a name that is synonymous with Fordsburg. There is every single person around the country knows this man, has been a patient of his at some time, or whose lives have been touched by him. Dr. Essop Jassat, a man I'm very proud to say is also my grand uncle. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Dr. Jassat, you are a name that is synonymous with Fordsburg. People know you everywhere you go. You've been a strong part of the fabric of this community and this society. When we phoned around and we were speaking to people in Fordsburg, your name came up repeatedly. What does it feel like that people hold you in such high respect for the amount that you've done for this community?
Well, I don't think I've done anything wonderful in my stay here. Some years ago, the Johannesburg Institute of Social Service had an annual general meeting. The function was to invite some prominent persons, people like Judge Zaheerah Thabo Mbeki were invited. But on the 80th anniversary, they said that one who had been part of this organization should be the guest speaker, and I was forced to make a speech on that occasion. And I said, what should I say? Well, they said, well, you know, your political activity, your medical activity, your trips with President Mandela all over the world. I said, no. My title of my talk was From Vitas to Fordsburg, and that's where I have been. I've moved very far, just from Fordsburg to Vitas. I was born in 11th Street, Fordsburg, 85 years ago.
Alhamdulillah.
The 11th Street separated the whites from the other groups that lived in this country. And my mother tells me that there wasn't much of a garden where I was born. There was a tall tree there. And so on a sunny day, she would put the pram outside the house. And I've been informed that the Afrikaans tannies would come across, look at myself, nap, tickle it and says, lekker coolie. Fortunately, my mother did not know Afrikaans or English. She didn't insult it. But that's where I was born in Friedel 85 years ago.
Alhamdulillah. I think your humbleness is something that as family members and even as people of the community has stood out so much, because for somebody who has achieved so much to say, I haven't achieved anything, I haven't done much in my life, you only have to read up about Dr. Jassat or speak to your family members to know how much he's accomplished and how much he has given so that all of us can have the life that we have at the moment. Dr. Jassat, I want to ask you about balancing your medical life with your political life, because you were always very strong politically, you had a very active political life, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. I just want to know, how difficult was it to manage it?
Actually, it wasn't difficult. After school, I used to go to the Transvaal Indian Congress office, and that's where I met people like Kathada, Maulvi Saluji, Maulvi Kachalia, Yusuf Kachalia, Mervi Thandri, wonderful individuals who had devoted their whole life and career to the betterment of New South Africa. They inspired me to take a similar stand. Living in Friedel, I used to go to buy bread and naan across at a bakery called the Actors Bakery, which was in the white section. And often returning home, I came with a bloodied nose or a solid, because that was the feeling that one had of being deprived. I could not go to town in the tram and sit with the whites. There was no library that I could go to except it was called the Bantu Social Center or Jubilee Center in Below Street Extension. And from Freedom, I used to walk there every 2 Saturdays and borrow some books, because I had a feeling that one had to read and learn about the world. And that's when I had to learn to borrow the books. There was no libraries in the area. I went to the Central Library and I was told, unfortunately, you can't borrow books here. You have to go to the only library that was in existence, or that was in the Lost Street Extension.
Is that where your need or your want to see social justice, to see the balance started from and came from, was access to spaces?
Yes, that was the reason. In 1947, there was a Zulu and Indian riots. And what happened was that the Indian Congress called upon students to have them appeal to the community to fund their whatever they were going to do. And so I marched up to the Congress office. I was given 2 pages of the Johannesburg telephone directory and a box of brown envelopes. And it was quite a difficult task. So I roped in many others from the school I attended. Some of them were my brother Abdullah, Farid Adams, Mozi Mullah, to assist. And that's how we got into the Youth Congress. And I ended up being chairman of the Congress. After some time, I was promoted to the senior Congress. And that's my political this. I matriculated at the Johannesburg Indian High. And of course, going to varsity was another problem, because there was a quota system. Out of the 400 or so new persons who were taken into the faculty, medical faculty, they only had 12 quotas for blacks. And who did they include? Blacks included Indians, Africans, Chinese, and colored. I was fortunate with some of my other friends to be admitted into the faculty of medicine. But what happened is that the first year, we all got through. But we were told that we could not proceed to the second year medicine because there were no facilities for us at the provincial hospitals. So many of our candidates who had applied and got in left the country and went to Irish or British universities. Dr. Maulvi Kachalia said, no, you must stay on. And what he did was that he said that I should finish the BSc. And I did the BSc without paying for the 2 years additional. And so I graduated BSc without having paid fees at WITS, because he said that it was no fault of yours that you were not admitted into the second year medicine. And that's how I started with my career at the University of Witwatersrand.
So it was a long story into the University of Witwatersrand. I think speaking to people as prolific as Dr. Jassat, it makes you realize how much we take for granted, our access to spaces, the ability to get into a degree, to continue with your degree, rather than being told, well, you've passed your first one, unfortunately, there's no more space for you because there's no space for anybody that's non-white. The tenacity, the grit, and the determination to make a difference is what stands out for me so much. Stay tuned. When we come back after this ad break, we'll continue the journey with Dr. Jassat. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back after the ad break. We are speaking to the dynamic and legendary Dr. Jassat. Doctor, when we when you spoke about not being able to get into your degree because of apartheid, because there were no spaces for you, you then subsequently completed your BSc and then completed your medical degree and became a household name in the Fordsburg area. I think everywhere, every person, I mean, even here when we were doing the interview, everybody knows you, all their children know you, everybody has walked through those doors. I have no doubt, I remember being in your surgery a number of times and cards being there. I'm sure you have every person in the community in those boxes at some point.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've been in practice for over 55 years. I started at VETS, and what happened is soon after graduating, I was banned for 10 years.
I was going to ask you about
that. While I was banned, I got married. And we had to get permission from the Minister of, to get to attend the mosque in Kirk Street. And I also had to get permission to attend my reception at the Planet Cinema. But we had to confine our guests to very few people. So what happened was my fellow comrades, a lot of them were waiters, decided to have a function for me at night at the Lajpur Madrasa Hall in 16th Street. It was done very secretively, and so a lot of friends who could not attend the reception in Planet came to the Lajpur Hall in 16th Street. The other thing I can mention about the Lajpur Madrasa is that when I graduated, I was given a reception at the Lajpur Hall corner, Krauser and 13th Street. So I have a gratitude to the Lajpur community for having honored me in a number of occasions.
You mentioned being banned and needing permission to attend your own nikah and permission to attend your own reception. How did you manage to balance a family life during this 10-year ban?
It was very difficult. I was confined to not meeting more than two persons at a time, which I had to ignore, because often a child would come in with a father and a mother, and that was already so. I was illegally carrying on that activity. For that, I was not charged. I was charged and sentenced to imprisonment for having failed to attend to my banning order. Once a month, I had to go to the Marshall Square and report. What happened was that morning, a little child got burnt in the flat I was going to live in later on, with tea. And so I used to go to my mother for breakfast. But that morning, what I did was I attended to this child who was burnt. And when I came back to the rooms, I was told there was a heart attack in Mint Road. Mr. Quadia had a heart attack. So I went there to attend to him, got a specialist in, because those days you couldn't just go to a hospital. And when I had finished, it was already 12, so I decided not to go for breakfast with my mother. And I carried on with the calls. And at night I realized that I had not reported. And for that I was charged and sentenced to 10 days imprisonment in the Marshall Square. I spent 10 days in prison there, and of course I was already banned, and so that's my life in prison. The second imprisonment was later on when I had attended Dr. Yusuf Garda's funeral in London, and for that I was charged for attending a communist funeral, and I was further sentenced to some imprisonment, which I spent in Pretoria, in Durban. In Durban, we faced charges of treason, and 17 of us were charged for treason. One of them was Mama Sisulu, and there was Kasim Saluji, Mewara M. Corbin, many others. We were then, my wife was told that through lawyers that we would be released that day, and she came to Maritzburg with 150,000 which she had got from the community to bail us out. What happened was that the Council of Churches had also sent a lot of money to bail us, but it was made to the deputy councillor, to the wrong person. So what happened is when we were released, we were short of 20,000. At 2 o'clock we were released, we were short of 20,000. And that money was collected from the community in Maritzburg. 20,000 in shillings and pence. So it took them hours and hours to collect the money. And finally we were eventually released at 10 o'clock at night. And what happened was that some people from Maritzburg and Durban drove us halfway, and the token family sent a car to pick me up and bring me home, which I reached at about 2 in the morning.
Sure. I don't think I've truly understood the depth of how much you've been through or the experiences you've had, and I don't think many of our viewers do either. I grew up in your home, and yet I feel like you always still smiled, you always showed us a good face, you were always teaching us something, and we never understood truly how much you had given up and how much you had sacrificed for all of us. With the community having raised so much for support, I have to ask you, being a family that was very politically involved, both yourself and Uncle Abdulhay, having friends that were so politically involved, what was the response when you came back into the community? Was the community open to accepting people that were always challenging the status quo?
It was very interesting that once you've been to prison, people try to keep away from you. Unfortunately, this did not happen with me. My practice increased.
Alhamdulillah.
And I think I did not, I was not ignored. I was accepted back into the community, and of course I became chairman of the 15th Street Mosque. I was taken into the Central Islamic Trust, and I was also taken and became a member of the Johannesburg Institute of Social Services, for which I served as chairman for a number of years. And of course, subsequently, I was elected to Parliament, where I served for 10 years, thanks to the support I got from the community.
Alhamdulillah.
And lately, I have been elected to the Integrity Committee to see that corruption is sort of sorted out.
Alhamdulillah. Dr. Jassat, for many of us and for our children, what would be your advice for us to walk our road and our journeys and our lives with the same integrity that you resemble in yours? Because I think many of us may not have the challenges that you have faced or the depth of the challenges you face. But what would be your advice for us in terms of us living our lives?
I would like to say to the young people that the purpose of life is not just to become successful, but to make an impact when you are in the community. That is the purpose of life. And I've tried to follow that in a perhaps little way that I could.
I think you've done it in far more than just a little way. I think you've done it in the most dynamic way, alhamdulillah. And I think it's such an impactful message, which we will repeat as well. But before we end, you have got one of the most blessed families and one of the most loving families around you who are very supportive. But this must have been a difficult journey for them as well, not just for your parents or your wife, your children, but everyone around you, that both brothers were very politically involved. Both brothers were always needed by the community, were always called on by the community. And I think we as a community never understood that you needed perhaps your family time, because everybody you speak to feels they have an ownership to Dr. Jassat or to the Jassat family.
You see, I think we've inherited the spirit of resistance. My father came to this country at the invitation of Ibrahim Aswad, who was the secretary to Gandhi. Mm-hmm. Now, Ibrahim Aswad's wife was a Jassat girl. Mm-hmm. And what happened was that when she passed away, he married a Malay lady who then gave rise to Zainab Aswad, Amina Aswad, and so we cover. My elder brother Muhammad went with Bri Bulbulia and defied the Group Palace Act by planting himself in Namdeni Road. So he was also a bit of an inspiration. And my father also was part of the group that burnt their passes outside the Newtown Mosque.
So resistance is part of the family.
It was part of the inheritance. We could not. It was genetic. Yeah, I think we just lucky that we were part of this struggle.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah so much for joining us on air. I think we could do so many shows on just you alone and Mr. Yusuf Garda alone. There definitely is no time limit to taking from this wisdom, but I truly appreciate the time you've given us. Jazakallah.
Thank you.
Dr. Jassat,
No, go ahead.
Dr. Jassat is a remarkable member of our community, much like Mr. Yusuf Garda is as well. Prolific members from whom we can take so much. Dr. Jassat, who I fondly called Mamaji, my grand uncle, is someone that I've learned from, who I've been around, and yet have not even heard half the stories he said, because he always carries himself with a smile, with dignity, almost as though nothing is too much. It's all in a day's work. And I think that is so much that we can take from. And if we are able to do as much as these men have done in their lives, and to be able to sit and say, I've only done a small portion, then we know we've achieved something. As Dr. Jassat has said, live a life of impact, live a purposeful life, and make a difference in your community, because that's when we know we've lived a life, or we've been through a life that's been well spent. Jazakallah so much for joining us on air. It's been an emotional day speaking to two men I greatly admire and respect, and I'm so honored to have been given the opportunity to be in their presence and to learn from them. Jazakallah khair. See you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.